Hey guys, it's Kraken here. Welcome to the first video of a new series I'm starting where I revisit some of my favorite games or review ones I haven't yet played. The real goal of this series is to personally commit to take time out of my busy life to simply play and enjoy video games again, something that has become increasingly difficult as I've gotten older. Gaming has traditionally been my main hobby and key source of relaxation, and my hope is that by giving myself a project to work towards, it might actually motivate me to finish more games, or at worst, allocate a little more time to enjoying them. With all that said, let's get started. For today's episode, I decided to return to a dear favorite of mine, and a game that really helped shape my taste in video games overall. The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion originally released in 2006. Developed by Bethesda Game Studios, the game is an open-world RPG set in the fictional world of Cyrodiil, taking place 6 years after the events of its predecessor, The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind. The game originally released for PC and Xbox 360, with this later being expanded to the PlayStation 3 in 2007. At 13 years old in 2006, I had just picked up an Xbox 360 and was eager to play the new Halo title that was scheduled to release later that year. Now, something to be aware of, back in 2006, at least in my circle of friends, not everyone had access to the internet as we do now. Game releases largely just happened, and you would hear about a game through word of mouth, or playing a game at a friend's house, rather than watching a content creator on YouTube or seeing a sponsored ad on Instagram. Some of us would even watch E3 every year, and maybe you'd catch wind of it there, but most often you'd simply go to a store and pick up a game that looked good. This is actually how I found out about Oblivion in the first place. In fact, I never actually owned this game until recently. Oblivion was one of those games where I would go over to a friend's house, create a character, and just watch each other play. Additionally, I never ended up beating the main storyline myself either. I of course know what happens as I witnessed my friend beat it, but much of my hands-on time with the game was simply running around doing side quests, causing general chaos, or creating the most fucked up looking creature known to man using Bethesda's renowned character editor. Mr. Howard, this is still your greatest creation. All that said, Oblivion absolutely changed the game with what I thought was possible when it came to video game experiences. World of Warcraft aside, Oblivion was by far the largest game I'd laid hands on at this time in my life, and the graphics, although somewhat aged in today's standards, blew me away. The level of immersion that Bethesda was able to create with Oblivion, I would argue, is still top tier. This is aided by the amazing soundtrack created by Jeremy Soule that many believe to be the greatest video game soundtrack ever created. Now, some would argue that the game's high number of bugs and glitches is immersion breaking, but you guys have to remember it. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
This might just be the break we need.
It's all over, lawbreaker!
In all seriousness, I think it does speak to how good this game is in so many aspects, that when there are bugs present, you as the player can most often move past them because the game is so good as a whole. And personally, the glitches in Oblivion also are hilarious in a way I can't quite describe. It's pretty rare that a bug happens in Oblivion and I get upset. On the contrary, I usually am pissing my pants with laughter, and this was the case both back in 2006 and during this playthrough.
It's all over, lawbreaker!
So with all that lore said and done, let's finally get to my replay of Oblivion here in 2025. As I stated, I never actually owned this game on 360, and even if I did, to say my 360 is hanging on to life by a thread would be an understatement. So I did what any responsible adult gamer does these days. I waited for the game to go on sale on Steam, I picked it up, and then I left it to rot in my Steam library for several years before ever playing it. Firing up Oblivion, I was immediately hit with the jolt of nostalgia we all crave. After blasting through the tutorial sequence, I jumped straight into the character creator, which, as I alluded to earlier, is easily one of my favorite parts of gaming. Games like Baldur's Gate 3, Dark Souls, WWE Wrestling, Fallout, and The Elder Scrolls Skyrim have all innovated in this space. However, for me, the original GOAT of in-game monster creation will always be Oblivion. Monstrosities aside, one thing I think that adds to Oblivion's endless replayability is its way of making the player make hard decisions during character creation. Things like background and class actually play a role in dictating how your gameplay experience is going to play out, and how your character will grow and level up. It's not that the game bars you from changing your playstyle mid-run-through, but The choices you make at the beginning do incentivize you to commit to a niche build rather than a master of all things. For this reason, I find it's usually good to set out some goals for each character, as certain builds will be better suited for particular things. For this particular build, I had 2 simple goals. One was to focus on the main story, as, like I said, I never actually completed it all the way through myself, and let's not get too distracted with everything else going on. My second goal was pretty straightforward. Don't create the same stupid stealth archer thief character that I always end up making. So I leant super hard into being a magic user while still being able to wear heavy armor because, well, I thought it was funny narratively. And with that, Lord Jabu Jabu was ready to leave the sewers.
Gross.
If you've never played Oblivion before, upon leaving the sewer tutorial area, the player is immediately allowed to do whatever the hell they want. As a young kid, this was quite exciting. Up to this point, the most open world I had gotten in a single-player game would probably have been limited to something along the scale of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and that game is still fairly contained, and when compared to a game like Oblivion, definitely linear. As I mentioned earlier, I had played World of Warcraft a decent amount at this point, but that game is an MMORPG, and although quite immersive and definitely massive, I always found myself drawn to each game for different reasons. In MMORPGs, you're largely creating memories and experiences with other players. However, the way you interact with worlds like that portrayed in Oblivion is quite different. As you, the player, are the only person pushing this story forward, the pace of play is entirely what you make of it. Every decision you make feels like it has real consequences on this world, whereas in a much larger online game this may not be the case. I intend to do a dedicated video about my experience playing World of Warcraft and MMORPGs at some point, but I found myself thinking about the difference in pace while playing Oblivion this time around, and I figured it was worth mentioning. As I stated during character creation, my main goal of this playthrough was to finally finish the main storyline. With that in mind, I headed off to deliver the Amulet of Kings to Joffrey the Priest over at Wayland Priory. It's a lot of words. Eventually I found myself to one of the most iconic sequences in the entire Elder Scrolls franchise, that of course being the Siege of Kvatch. As I was fighting off the Daedric onslaught, I was reminded that during my initial playthrough of this game in 2006, my friend and I actually stumbled upon this mission entirely separate of the main quest. I think the Siege of Kvatch was easily the selling point for me regarding this game, and although the combat of Oblivion has never been fantastic and definitely hasn't aged the best, the storyline's lore and overall ambience always lifted up for me. After sealing the Oblivion Gate, I headed inside to find the quest giver, who, much to my excitement, I totally forgot is voiced by none other than my favorite actor, Sean fucking Bean.
One does not simply walk into Wayland Priory.
With Sean following along, we headed for the Blades Fortress, nestled high in the mountains near Bruma. At this stage, the main quest opens up a bit, with the player completing a variety of fetch quests for Joffrey, whilst Sean learns how to be the next ruler of Tamriel, save the kingdom from the ongoing Daedric invasion, and so on and so forth. For the next few days, I plugged away at Oblivion, attempting to finish the main storyline before life inevitably got busy again. However, it was right then that something entirely unexpected happened.
Find him and close shut the jaws of
Not.
Oblivion.
There it is. This is what we're capable of together, boys. Look at this fucking thing.
Yeah, so that happened. On April 22nd of 2025, out of absolutely nowhere, Bethesda released Oblivion Remastered for the PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X. Although the release announcement was more or less leaked a few days prior, the game was essentially a shadow drop, with Bethesda only admitting to its existence the day of its release. Developed by Virtuos on behalf of Bethesda, the game is a complete graphical overhaul of the original 2006 release, using Unreal 5. In addition, the remaster made various other tweaks and changes, such as redesigned menus, leveling systems, and not least of all, sprinting. Okay, so honestly, the timing of this release is crazy for me. Roughly a week after I randomly pick up a nearly 19-year-old game again, and it gets a remaster out of nowhere. All I'm saying is...
That's destiny! That's will!
In all seriousness, initially I was unsure how to feel about this announcement. Like, for sure, when I first saw the hero's silhouette standing in front of the Oblivion Gate, no notes, fantastic. But when I really thought about Oblivion actually getting a remaster, the alarm bell started to go off a bit. You see, Bethesda's record as of late has been, let's just say, rocky at best. Fallout 76, Starfield, the whole collector's helmet bag thing, Andrew WK playing live at Bethesda E3 2018. That guy's reaction lives rent-free in my head. The once beloved company has certainly had a downturn since, 2015? Wait, Fallout 4 came out in 2015? And on top of that, they also hold the title for most times unnecessarily remastering the same game. And I'm of course referring to Skyrim. So all that put together, I was a little skeptical on just how good this remaster could be. Now, I'm not saying Oblivion doesn't deserve a remake. I think I've made it clear I absolutely love this game. Furthermore, I'm not alone in this. Entire communities have dedicated themselves to modding Oblivion over the years, with some even attempting to remaster it themselves in the Skyrim engine. It's just whether Bethesda actually succeeded in improving the game, which I wasn't sure of, or were they simply selling us back a game we already could play. Oh, and give us $80, please. I also want to state here, for the record, I really don't want to come off as a complete and utter doomer. I would like nothing more than for Oblivion Remastered to live up to its expectations. Furthermore, several of Bethesda's previous titles like Fallout 3, 4, Oblivion, and Skyrim remain some of my favorite games. But like most AAA game studios in the last decade or so, they have made a multitude of missteps that have eroded consumer trust and goodwill. The week post-Oblivion Remaster releasing, I actually had to leave town for work briefly. In some ways this was actually lucky, as it allowed the dust to settle and my personal FOMO to wear off. Additionally, several of my friends picked up the game and sent me clips of how the game looked and gave me some really good feedback on how the game felt overall. Upon returning home, I decided, what the hell, and swiped the credit card. As a note about the price, I was actually proven wrong, and the game, on Steam at least, retailed for only $66.99 Canadian, which I'm pretty sure might be what it retailed for back in 2006. Who knew of all things to resist inflation, it would be The Elder Scrolls Oblivion. Jumping into the game, I was immediately blown away by the graphical improvements from the 2006 release. Furthermore, the character creator has definitely been improved, and, well, enough said. After recreating Lord Jabu Jabu in this version, I set out into Cyrodiil once again. Although I held over much of my brick shithouse spellcaster build from the previous save, I decided that I would instead focus more on exploration and side quests, as I was worried if I simply retread the first half of the main quest again, it might put a damper on this experience. With that goal in mind, I left the sewers and wandered eastwards to a nearby island that was apparently inhabited by a group of bandits. After I dealt with the bandits, I discovered a doorway that led underground. So, funny thing about this location, and something that might surprise any other seasoned Oblivion player, is that in all my various playthroughs of the original release, I never actually discovered this place, which is crazy because it's like literally a stone's throw from where the tutorial spits you out. 5 minutes into a remaster, and here I was having a completely fresh experience. Once again, it's almost as if this was
Destiny!
So I don't mean to sound super hyperbolic or anything, but as I was exploring this dungeon, I had a moment where it felt like I was playing this game for the first time again. The dungeon design here is quite good, and the upgraded lighting was definitely noticeable. Remastered aside, I think the dungeon at... okay, let me get this right. Vilverin? Vilverin can be viewed as a microcosm of the excellent game design that was utilized when creating Oblivion, and for that matter, many of the other earlier Bethesda titles. The location of the dungeon is such that any new player exiting the tutorial is facing it. The ruined tower is an obvious landmark, and although nothing forces you to go there, Exhibit A, 13-year-old Von Kraken chasing a passing butterfly, the vista is enough to draw in any curious player. Once you enter, the dungeon does a good job of subconsciously introducing you to several of the game's core mechanics and themes. The enemies are relatively easy to kill and staggered so they don't overwhelm you, and additionally, the environments are designed in such a way that you, as the player, can experiment with different tactics. Are you someone who utilizes stealth, or are you more of a smash-face, chunky salsa kind of player? Furthermore, the dungeon has several various side rooms and passages, which rewards players that wish to explore every nook and cranny and turn over every box. I'm definitely one of those types of players. That said, I never felt lost in the complex and wasn't overwhelmed by choice, something that some games do better than others, I would say. However, my favorite part of this dungeon, and one of my favorite tropes of Bethesda games in general, is the subtle storytelling that they build into their games, both through environmental cues and placement of interactable objects. In this example, I entered the dungeon strictly for exploration purposes, having no quest to complete and therefore no guide or endpoint. After about 10 or 15 minutes, I felt like I had explored every corner of the dungeon, having defeated a multitude of bandits and looted in some chests. Preparing to leave, I stumbled upon a letter apparently written by the bandit leader. In it, they noted that 2 of their members had complained about strange noises down in the tomb area, and that after spending some time down there, one had actually disappeared. This clue urged me to return to the tomb, searching high and low for a secret door or switch. After finding some small bloodstains on a wall, I discovered a nearby hidden floor switch that, when activated, opened up an entirely new area of the ruins. Following a corridor, I found scratch marks on the walls, and eventually the corpse of our lost bandit. Evidently they had tried to escape, but had met some sort of untimely end. Continuing on, the dungeon then turned into a maze of traps, raised zombies, and hidden treasure, eventually culminating in a boss fight with a necromancer who had taken up residence here. Upon completing the dungeon at Vilverin, I was incredibly impressed by the amount of depth that this relatively unimportant location had to offer. As I mentioned, I think this dungeon really exemplifies much of what Bethesda did well in its earlier titles with regards to game design and overall philosophy. Filling a seemingly random location with so much stuff really makes the world feel lived in, and that adventure could be around any corner. Little storylines and Easter eggs such as these reward the curious and encourage players to slow down, take in their surroundings, as blasting through risks missing things. Although many of these self-contained story arcs may not always have physical rewards attached to them, they are most often, at least in my opinion, extremely satisfying to find and ultimately complete. Furthermore, I believe that having this extra flavor sprinkled throughout the world has also increased the replayability of this game at large, and has definitely kept me coming back for more throughout the years. Alright, so after listening to me drone on about the starter dungeon, you're probably thinking that Oblivion Remaster is pretty good. And, well, the short answer to that question would be yes. But allow me to expand a bit on that answer from a few different viewpoints. First off, I think I've made clear in this video, Oblivion was and is, in my opinion, an extremely innovative game, and did a lot right when it originally released back in 2006. Although the game still holds up, particularly for those of us who played it nearly 20 years ago, I would concede that a lot of its replayability is likely nested, at least in part, in nostalgia. A lot of the game's systems are a tad clunky, and at times can feel a bit outdated. During this playthrough, I definitely found myself grimacing at times, finding the controls on keyboard and mouse a bit janky compared to what I remember. I think I may have subconsciously been expecting the polish and quality of life improvements Bethesda had added in Skyrim, so for that I'll give it a pass. For a newer younger player, however, I think Oblivion 2006 may be a hard sell, or at the very least might not live up to the hype. I do stand by the statement that the story and ambience are fantastic, but if the game feels clunky and slow, I could see that turning players off, particularly those who've never played this one before. And that leads me to Oblivion Remastered. As of recording this video, I've logged about 10 hours in the 2025 release. So far, my overall experience with the game has been awesome. The game looks fantastic, and with the updated graphics, I would say calling this game a remaster is honestly underselling it. The clunkiness that I referred to in the 2006 release is more or less absent here, being replaced by some updated systems not limited to more fluid inventory and menu layout, smoother and more diverse combat animations, updated NPC facial reactions, and as I mentioned earlier, sprinting. Most of the NPC dialogue remains the same, and the soundtrack still hits. Of all the changes, I think my favorite are the lighting and ambient updates, particularly at night. The simple flicker of a torch or gazing up at the night sky really adds a whole other level of immersion to this game. Furthermore, the sound and feel of the weather is fantastic, and I found myself on a couple of occasions simply standing on a street corner to just listen to a thunderstorm roll in. The game runs pretty darn good, and I was able to play the game on ultra quality with no, well, how do I put this, out of the ordinary issues? What I mean by that is the original jank of Oblivion is still very much here, and I think that's a good thing. The presence of these, for lack of a better term, harmless glitches is very much an iconic part of early Bethesda games like Oblivion and Skyrim, and quite frankly, it wouldn't be the same without them, so I'm happy they stayed.
Well, then slash and smash. Yeah!
It's an apt name. He's got big maces and big axes. Herbal is a big fan of killing things thoroughly. We're all talking about the Emperor's murder. We have no Emperor.
May you rest in peace.
With that said, the game isn't entirely without issue. Early into my playthrough, I did encounter a game-crashing glitch during the two sides of a coin quest. I think I agreed to not kill the lady, then broke into her house at night to kill her, then for some reason the game wanted me to pick a lock I'd already picked, and then it just crashed every time I did. Luckily, I was able to reload to a save approximately half an hour before, so it wasn't really a big deal, but regardless, it did happen. Secondly, my buddy called me up to complain of a rather serious glitch that has barred him from completing the final Thieves Guild quest. During the final mission, the player is instructed to steal a rare item from a group of monks, avoiding detection at all costs. If, for any reason, the player is detected, the mission is failed and the player is then locked from ever completing the Thieves Guild at all. Apparently, when attempting to do this, no matter what my friend tries, the monks detect him and he auto-fails the mission. During this quest, it's required to distract the monks by summoning some creature, then you sit in a chair or something. I honestly couldn't remember doing this in 2006, so he sent some videos and I'll allow them to speak for themselves.
Hey, you don't belong here. Welcome to this holy library, Lady Cameron.
Unfortunately, his previous save file is something like 8 hours of gameplay prior to this. Rookie maneuver. So essentially his options are go back 8 hours or accept he will never complete this quest, which is not a great decision. It is difficult to say if these two glitches in particular already existed in the game or are unique to the remaster, but for the record I did have something like this happen to me in Skyrim, and honestly it really sucks, and no matter how funny those videos are to watch, I do feel really bad.
You don't belong here.
He was here a second. He was here a second.
Where are you?
I'd also point out that unfortunately glitches like this are not altogether uncommon in larger open world games like this, particularly ones that have so many intertwining storylines and interactions. Even games that are widely revered for their polish, such as Baldur's Gate 3, can experience these types of lockout glitches, and although not excusable or any less frustrating for the players involved, I figured it was only fair to mention. So here are my overall takeaways, as I feel this video is getting a bit long and hopefully not overly boring. I think Oblivion Remastered does a very respectable job of doing what a remaster should do. Bring a game from the past to the present, preserving the core themes and elements that made people fall in love with it, while simultaneously updating the game to allow newer returning players to enjoy it with today's polish. I think a main reason I had initial reservations for this remaster is simply that too many times this has not been the case. Most often a remaster will do very little, in which case, what's the incentive for the player moving off the old version? Or they'll change too much, in which case, it's not really a remaster, it's something else entirely. I guess my point is that remasters can cloud expectations, but I'm getting a bit off topic again, so let's just say that I was definitely wrong in this particular case. Overall, I'm really happy with the remaster we got, and the price point is also quite fair for the product in my opinion. If you've never played Oblivion, or an Elder Scrolls game at all for that matter, I would strongly recommend picking this up, as it's an excellent entry point for any player into the series. Furthermore, if you're like me and were thinking of returning to Oblivion in 2025, I would honestly recommend going for the remaster rather than the 2006 release. That said, if you already own the old one and don't feel like spending $66.99 Canadian, I think it still has value, and prior to switching over to the remastered version, I was having an excellent time revisiting it. In closing, I'm really excited to keep playing this remaster, and I'm definitely going to beat the main quest this time, I promise. Additionally, I'm hoping that this release signals a return to form for Bethesda, and I'm cautiously optimistic that The Elder Scrolls 6, whenever it eventually happens, might be more reminiscent of the studio's earlier magic that made me fall in love with this franchise. If you're still here, I want to sincerely thank you for spending some time with me today. Making this video has been a really fun new adventure for me, and I dare say showing some early gains with regards to achieving a better mental state. If you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it, as I'm very much still figuring all this out. And if you'd like to follow along, consider subscribing to the channel or checking out some of my other videos. Regardless, I really appreciate the support, and I'll see you all next time.